Most people knew Dean Martin as the relaxed, effortless entertainer, the man who never seemed shaken by anything. But one night, just after midnight, Dean Martin drove across town to John Wayne's house, unannounced. He didn't call ahead. He didn't bring anyone with him. And according to those close to Wayne, Dean looked different that night, quiet, serious, almost nervous. John Wayne opened the door, expecting a casual visit. Instead, Dean Martin delivered news that would change the next several years of Wayne's life and create a private bond between two Hollywood legends that neither of them ever spoke about publicly. What happened after that midnight conversation stayed hidden for years, until someone close to Wayne finally revealed the truth. And when they did, it changed how people saw both men forever. Before that quiet midnight visit, Dean Martin and John Wayne already shared something rare in Hollywood, a friendship built on mutual respect rather than publicity. They weren't constant co-stars. They weren't part of the same social circle every night. But when they did spend time together, people noticed the ease between them. Their most visible connection came in 1966, during the filming of The Sons of Katie Elder. John Wayne personally pushed for Dean Martin to be cast in the film, a decision that surprised studio executives at the time. Wayne believed Martin had more depth than people realized, and during filming, that belief proved right. The two men couldn't have seemed more different. John Wayne was disciplined, direct, and known for his strong presence on set. Dean Martin, by contrast, carried a relaxed, effortless style, often appearing calm even during stressful moments. But beneath those differences, they shared something important: professionalism and loyalty. Crew members later recalled that Wayne admired how prepared Martin was, despite his laid-back reputation. Martin, in turn, respected Wayne's leadership and quiet generosity toward everyone on set. And during that production, something happened that deepened their bond even further. Partway through filming, John Wayne was dealing with serious health concerns. Though not widely discussed at the time, Wayne was quietly managing physical strain and fatigue while continuing to work long days. Martin noticed. He didn't make a show of it. He didn't draw attention. But crew members later remembered Martin adjusting his timing, keeping scenes smooth, and helping maintain a relaxed atmosphere whenever Wayne looked tired. It was subtle, but Wayne saw it, and he didn't forget. After filming wrapped, the two stayed in touch, not constantly, but consistently. They would occasionally meet at dinners, charity events, or mutual gatherings. Their conversations were often private, away from crowds and cameras. Hollywood friendships often faded once projects ended, but this one didn't. By the late 1960s, both men were at the height of their careers. John Wayne remained one of Hollywood's most recognizable stars, carrying major productions and commanding enormous audiences. Dean Martin, meanwhile, balanced films, television, and music, becoming one of the most versatile entertainers in the industry. From the outside, everything looked stable. Successful careers, strong public images, busy schedules. But in the months leading up to that midnight visit, something quietly changed. Friends of Dean Martin later noticed he had become more reserved in private conversations. He was still charming in public, still relaxed on camera, but off-screen, there were moments when he seemed distracted. No one knew exactly why. Not yet. And then, one night, Dean Martin got into his car and drove across town. He didn't call ahead. He didn't bring anyone with him. Just after midnight, he arrived at John Wayne's house and knocked on the door. What happened next would quietly change their friendship and reveal a side of both men that Hollywood rarely saw. By the time Dean Martin arrived at John Wayne's home that night, it was already past midnight. Wayne wasn't expecting anyone. Those close to him later said he had been winding down for the evening, reviewing notes and preparing for upcoming work. When the knock came, it caught him off guard. Visitors at that hour were rare. Wayne opened the door and saw Dean Martin standing there. No smile, no casual greeting, just a quiet seriousness that immediately told Wayne something wasn't right. According to accounts shared years later, Dean asked if they could talk privately. Wayne stepped aside and invited him in. The two men sat down, away from the main living area. No one else was present. No assistants, no family members, no studio representatives. Just two friends in a quiet room. Dean Martin didn't waste time. He explained that he was facing a situation that had become increasingly difficult. one that involved both professional pressure and personal strain. The details remained private, but those close to Wayne later suggested it centered around commitments, expectations, and decisions that could affect Martin's future. It wasn't something Dean Martin typically shared. He was known for keeping things light, even when facing challenges. But that night was different. Wayne listened carefully. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer immediate advice. He simply let Dean speak. As the conversation continued, the weight of the situation became clearer. Martin was being pulled in multiple directions: work obligations, personal responsibilities, and mounting pressure from people around him. There wasn't an easy answer. If he chose one path, he risked disappointing powerful industry figures. If he chose another, he risked personal consequences that could follow him for years. Dean Martin wasn't asking for publicity. He wasn't asking for help in public. He was asking for perspective from someone he trusted. Wayne understood the seriousness immediately. People who knew Wayne often described him as decisive, someone who didn't hesitate when a friend needed support. But this situation wasn't simple. Any involvement from Wayne could carry consequences of its own. Studios watched everything. Commitments were tightly scheduled, and stepping in, even privately, could create ripple effects. For a few moments, the room fell quiet. Wayne leaned back, considering everything Dean had shared. Then, according to later accounts, Wayne made a decision. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was immediate. He told Dean Martin he would stand by him, whatever direction the situation required. It was the kind of promise Wayne didn't make lightly. Dean Martin reportedly nodded, relieved but still quiet. The two men continued talking, working through possibilities and next steps. The conversation lasted less than an hour. But when Dean Martin left that night, something had changed. Within days, people close to Wayne noticed subtle shifts in his schedule. Certain commitments were adjusted. Meetings were postponed. Priorities quietly rearranged. No public explanation was given. No headlines appeared. But behind the scenes, Wayne had begun acting on the promise he made that night. And what he did next surprised even those who knew him best. Because John Wayne wasn't just offering advice anymore. He was stepping in personally. And it would cost him more than anyone expected. The morning after Dean Martin's visit, John Wayne began making calls. Not to studios, not to reporters, but to a small circle of trusted contacts, people he rarely involved unless something truly mattered. Those close to Wayne later said his tone was calm, but direct. He wasn't asking questions. He was setting things in motion. Within hours, Wayne started adjusting his schedule. Meetings were postponed. Travel plans quietly shifted. And a few commitments, ones Wayne normally would never change, were suddenly moved aside. It didn't go unnoticed. People around Wayne were used to his discipline. He was known for sticking to plans, honoring contracts, and rarely altering commitments once they were made. But this time was different. According to later recollections, Wayne made time to personally follow up on the situation Dean Martin had shared. He reached out to individuals involved, offering quiet support and, in some cases, using his influence to ease tensions behind the scenes. Wayne didn't make demands. He didn't leverage his reputation publicly. Instead, he worked quietly, the same way he had handled personal matters throughout his career. Those closest to him noticed the change immediately. He was more focused, more deliberate, and occasionally unavailable in ways that surprised even longtime associates. By the end of that week, Wayne had already sacrificed time that had been reserved for upcoming projects. It wasn't a dramatic public move, but in Hollywood, even small adjustments could carry weight. Studios relied on precision. Schedules were tight. Budgets were fixed. And Wayne stepping away, even briefly, meant ripple effects. Still, Wayne didn't change course. He had made a promise that night, and he intended to keep it. But what no one knew at the time, not even Dean Martin, was that Wayne was planning something beyond short-term support. He wasn't just helping with a single problem. He was preparing to stand by Dean Martin for as long as the situation required. And when that became clear, it surprised everyone. Years later, someone close to Wayne shared something that changed how people viewed that period entirely. Wayne hadn't told anyone about the midnight visit. Not publicly, not privately, not even to some members of his inner circle. For years, people assumed Wayne's schedule changes were simply routine decisions. But according to a longtime associate, Wayne had quietly tied those changes to the promise he made that night, a promise he never mentioned again. It wasn't about publicity. It wasn't about credit. Wayne simply believed that when a friend asked for help, you showed up. And he did, for far longer than anyone realized. In the weeks following that midnight visit, John Wayne's quiet support for Dean Martin continued. Nothing dramatic appeared in public. No interviews, no announcements, no visible signs that anything unusual had happened. But behind the scenes, Wayne remained involved. He checked in regularly, adjusted commitments when necessary, and made sure Dean Martin knew he wasn't handling the situation alone. Those close to both men later described this period as unusually private, even by Hollywood standards. The two spoke more often, sometimes meeting quietly away from studios and public gatherings. What stood out most was Wayne's consistency. He didn't offer help once and move on. He stayed present, and that meant sacrifice. Over the next several months, Wayne turned down or delayed certain opportunities. While not all were major headlines, people in the industry noticed. Wayne was known for reliability. When he committed to something, he followed through. But during this period, he became more selective. Not withdrawn, just focused. Friends later recalled seeing the two men together more often in quieter settings, small dinners, private conversations, and occasional visits that didn't involve the usual Hollywood crowd. Their bond deepened. It wasn't built on publicity or shared projects anymore. It was built on trust. And Wayne never spoke about it publicly. That part mattered. In an industry where stories often became headlines, Wayne kept this entirely private. He didn't mention it in interviews. He didn't refer to it during promotions. He simply continued showing up for Dean Martin when needed. Over time, the immediate pressure surrounding Martin's situation eased. Work stabilized. Public appearances returned to normal. And from the outside, everything looked unchanged. But those closest to them knew something had shifted. The friendship between Dean Martin and John Wayne had become stronger, quieter, but deeper. Years passed. Both men continued their careers, appearing in films, television, and public events. Their paths crossed occasionally, and whenever they did, observers noticed the same ease between them that had formed years earlier. But still, neither man ever spoke about that midnight visit. Not once. It remained a private moment, known only to a small circle. Then, years later, something surfaced. Someone close to Wayne shared the story, carefully, respectfully, revealing that the quiet changes during that period weren't random at all. They traced back to that single knock on the door after midnight. And suddenly, people began to see those years differently, because what looked like ordinary career decisions were actually the result of a promise made between two friends. And there was one final detail, something small but meaningful, that confirmed just how seriously Wayne had taken that promise. For years, the midnight visit between Dean Martin and John Wayne remained quietly tucked away in memory, something only a handful of people knew about. Then, sometime later, a close associate of Wayne's began sharing small details about that period. Nothing dramatic, just observations. He recalled how Wayne had carefully rearranged his schedule during those months, how he made private calls, and how he seemed unusually focused on staying available for Dean Martin whenever needed. But the most telling detail came from something simple. Wayne had kept notes, not formal records, just brief reminders, written privately. According to those who later saw them, some entries referenced meetings, calls, and quiet check-ins during that period. There were no explanations, no emotional language, just short, practical reminders, the way Wayne handled most things in his life. Yet those small entries confirmed something important. Wayne hadn't forgotten the promise he made that night. He followed through, consistently, quietly, without recognition. People close to Wayne later said this reflected his personality perfectly. He wasn't someone who made grand public gestures. He believed in showing up, privately, consistently, and without drawing attention. Dean Martin never publicly discussed the midnight visit either, and that silence spoke volumes. Because in Hollywood, stories often surface quickly, but this one stayed quiet for years. When it finally surfaced, it wasn't about scandal or drama. It was about loyalty. By the end of that period, Wayne had quietly adjusted months of his time, made countless calls, and stayed present for a friend who needed support. He never mentioned it in interviews. He never used it to shape his public image. He simply did what he believed was right. And for many who later heard the story, that quiet loyalty revealed something deeper about both men, a side rarely seen behind the fame. John Wayne built his reputation playing strong, dependable characters on screen, but the midnight visit from Dean Martin showed that those qualities weren't just part of his roles. They were part of who he was. He didn't help for recognition. He didn't help for publicity. He helped because a friend knocked on his door and asked. In an industry built around visibility, Wayne chose something quieter, loyalty without attention. And Dean Martin, known for his effortless charm and relaxed persona, showed something equally meaningful that night, trust. He chose John Wayne when he needed someone to talk to. Not a studio executive, not a publicist, a friend. So here's the question. In your own life, who would you show up for after midnight? Who would you make time for, even if no one ever knew? Because sometimes, the moments that define people aren't the ones seen on screen. They're the quiet ones. The late-night conversations, the promises made privately, the knock on the door, and the decision to open it. If this story meant something to you, drop a comment with one word that describes what John Wayne did that night. Loyalty, respect, friendship. I read every one. And if you enjoy stories like this, the ones that reveal the human side of Hollywood legends, subscribe for more. Because next time, we're uncovering another moment few people knew about. When one Hollywood legend made a quiet decision, that changed another star's life forever. And just like this story, it all started with something small. A conversation, no cameras, and a choice no one expected.